a billionaire, saved a dying maid everyone abandoned, then discovered she owned half his empire. The woman in the white diamond gown crushed the last pills, keeping my heart stable, while Adrian Vale stood on a stage telling 500 wealthy guests that no human life should ever be measured by money. I heard the plastic bottle crack beneath Celeste Harrington's heel before the first violent spasm tore through my chest. The sound was small, almost delicate, but my cardiologist's warning thundered through my mind. If your rhythm becomes unstable again, you may have only minutes to reach a hospital. I fell to my knees on the ballroom's polished marble and reached for the tablets scattering between expensive shoes. No one bent down to help me. A woman wearing an emerald necklace lifted the hem of her gown so my fingers would not touch it. A man holding a champagne glass watched one tablet roll beneath his shoe and stepped aside only after it had dissolved in spilled wine. "Please," I whispered. "Those are my heart pills." Celeste looked down at me with the calm satisfaction of someone who had never been forced to consider the cost of her cruelty. Champagne stained the lower edge of her $30,000 gown because she had stepped backward into the tray I was carrying, yet she had already decided that the accident belonged to me. "Then perhaps you should have protected them better," she said. Moments earlier, she had slapped me hard enough to turn my face toward the crowd. Now she pressed her jeweled heel down again, grinding the remaining tablets into white powder. Several guests gasped, but no one stopped her. Behind us, enormous silver letters spelling Vale Internationalization glowed above the stage. Adrian Vale's voice disappeared in the middle of his speech. He stood behind the podium, tall and severe in a perfectly tailored black suit, staring at the woman his family expected him to marry. His expression changed when he saw me clutching my chest. He stepped away from the microphone, but the hotel manager reached me first. Mr. Collins seized my arm and pulled me upright so quickly that the chandeliers blurred. "What have you done, Grace?" he hissed. "She walked into me," I said, struggling to breathe. "Check the security cameras. I do not need a camera to see that you have humiliated one of our most important guests." "She destroyed my medication. You destroyed her dress." Celeste folded her arms. "I want her removed before the press notices." Mr. Collins tightened his grip. Adrian was already descending from the stage, pushing past donors and board members. But the manager dragged me toward the service doors before he could reach us. "I haven't been paid for this week," I protested. "Your wages will be applied to the damage. You cannot legally do that. You are in no position to tell me what I can do." The ballroom doors closed behind us, shutting out the music, the chandeliers, and the murmurs of people who had paid thousands of dollars to attend a charity gala, yet could not spare one moment of compassion for a dying employee. The service corridor smelled of detergent, hot metal, and old carpet. My pulse stumbled, raced, and then seemed to vanish. I pressed one hand against the wall. "I need an ambulance." Mr. Collins glanced toward the ballroom doors, more concerned that flashing lights might disturb the event than that my heart might stop. "Stop being dramatic. I have a serious valve condition. My rhythm is unstable. You were healthy enough to work 14 hours, because you threatened to fire me if I took another break." His face hardened. "Security will escort you to the loading entrance. Collect your belongings and leave." 2 guards appeared near the stairwell. One of them, a young man named Luis, took one look at my gray face and hesitated. "Sir, she needs medical help. She is performing for sympathy." Mr. Collins pointed toward the employee area. "Get her out of sight." I should have screamed loudly enough for the guests to hear. I should have refused to move. Instead, I did what people without money often learn to do when their survival depends on remaining employed. I lowered my head and tried not to make the powerful people angrier. Luis kept one hand near my elbow as we moved toward the locker room. Each step sent pressure through my chest. I retrieved my faded canvas bag from beneath a bench. It contained 2 uniforms, a hairbrush, $27, an unpaid electricity notice, and the small steel box my father had placed in my hands 3 days before he died. I had carried it through every eviction, every temporary room, and every job because it was the final object he had touched. "If I faint, please don't let them throw this away," I told Luis. "You are not going to faint. Promise me." His expression softened. "I promise." He led me through the loading area and opened the rear door. Cold rain swept beneath the narrow metal awning. "Can I wait here until a taxi comes?" I asked. "Collins said you have to leave the property." Luis looked ashamed. I stepped into the rain, my shoes slipping on the wet pavement. The door shut behind me. The alley seemed impossibly long. Beyond it lay the main road, a bus stop and, if I could stay conscious long enough, a public emergency department that might stabilize me before asking how I intended to pay. I managed 6 steps. On the seventh, crushing pain tore beneath my breastbone. My canvas bag fell from my shoulder. I struck the brick wall and slid to the ground. Rain soaked my hair and ran across my lips. I tried to call for help, but my voice would not rise above a whisper. Headlights appeared at the far end of the alley. A black limousine turned toward me, braked hard, and stopped. The rear door opened before the driver could reach it. Adrian Vale stepped into the rain. He had removed his tie, and the top button of his white shirt was open. For one stunned second, the most powerful man in the city stood motionless as he saw the maid who had vanished from his ballroom curled beside a loading dock. Then he ran. Grace. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the water soaking his suit. "Can you hear me?" I tried to push his hand away. "Go back to your guests. What medication did Celeste destroy?" I gave him the name between shallow breaths. He turned to his driver. "Call St. Catherine's. Tell them we are bringing in a patient with severe mitral valve disease and a possible ventricular arrhythmia." "I cannot go there," I said. "Why not?" "It is private." "That does not matter." "It matters when you receive the bill." His eyes flashed with something close to anger. "You are not dying in an alley because you are afraid of an invoice." He reached beneath my knees and lifted me. The movement made pain explode through my chest. I cried out and clutched his shirt. "My bag. My driver has it. The steel box must remain closed. It will. Promise me." Adrian looked directly into my eyes. There was no pity in his face, only fear and guilt. "I promise, Grace." Inside the limousine, he laid me carefully across the seat and supported my head against his arm. His driver spoke rapidly into a phone while streetlights blurred past the windows. Adrian pressed 2 fingers against the side of my neck, searching for a pulse that refused to settle. "Stay awake. I am trying. Tell me about the box. It belonged to my father. What was his name?" "Daniel Bennett." Adrian's hand paused for a fraction of a second. "Did you know him?" I asked. "No, but I have heard the name." "Where?" "I cannot remember." His answer sounded honest, but the darkness was already closing around me. "Don't let them throw away what he left," I whispered. "They won't. People always discard what poor families leave behind. I will not." The last thing I felt before losing consciousness was Adrian Vale's hand closing around mine. I woke beneath white surgical lights with an oxygen mask covering my face and several people speaking at once. A monitor shrieked beside me. A nurse read the information engraved on my medical bracelet. "Congenital mitral valve disease. Previous ventricular tachycardia. No emergency contact." A doctor leaned over me. "Grace, your heart rhythm is dangerously unstable, and the damaged valve is causing acute heart failure. Medication has not corrected it. You need emergency surgery. Do you understand?" Terror cut through the fog. "I cannot pay." "The financial arrangements are handled," Adrian said from beside the bed. His rain-soaked hair had fallen across his forehead, and he was holding my steel box against his chest. "That is not consent," the doctor said firmly. He looked at me. "Grace, without surgery, you may not survive the night. Do you authorize us to proceed?" I stared at the monitor, at the frightened nurse, and finally at Adrian. "My box." He raised it so I could see the unbroken lock. "I have it. Do not leave it." "I won't." My throat tightened. "Yes," I whispered to the doctor. "Do the surgery." The mask descended over my face, and the room disappeared. I woke nearly 2 days later with a deep ache beneath my ribs and a machine breathing softly beside me. Morning light filled the private hospital room. Adrian sat near the window, his long body bent forward and his hands clasped as though he had been praying or fighting with himself. My canvas bag rested beside his chair, and the steel box remained unopened on the table. When my eyes moved, he stood immediately. "Grace?" A nurse entered, checked the monitors, and gave me water one careful sip at a time. After she left, I touched the bandage beneath my hospital gown. "What did they do?" "They repaired the valve and implanted a small cardiac monitor. The surgeon said the operation went well." "How long was I unconscious?" "Almost 40 hours. How much will this cost?" His mouth tightened. "That should not be your first question." "It is the first question people, without money, are trained to ask." "You will not receive a bill." "Then you will." "Yes." I turned my face toward the window. "I can never repay you. I did not save you to create a debt." That is what wealthy people say when they expect gratitude instead. "I do not want gratitude. You do not know me well enough to want anything else." He was quiet for a moment. "I know you apologized after another person walked into you. I know you continued working while your lips were turning blue. I know you begged for wages you had already earned instead of asking a ballroom full of donors for help. I know the only thing you feared losing was something your father left behind. You searched my bag. The emergency staff looked for identification. I stopped them before they opened the box. I glanced at the table. The old lock was untouched. You kept your promise. Yes, why did you follow me? Adrian moved toward the foot of the bed. I saw Celeste step on the bottle. By the time I crossed the ballroom, Collins had removed you. He told me you had gone home, but a server said security had taken you through the service corridor. My driver and I searched the loading entrances. You left your own foundation gala to look for a maid? I left because a woman had been assaulted in a building owned by my company while I stood on a stage speaking about dignity. His voice hardened. I should have acted sooner. You noticed only when the situation became impossible to ignore. I noticed too late. The person on the floor does not have the luxury of waiting for powerful men to understand what is happening. The truth struck him. He did not defend himself. You are right. His answer unsettled me more than an argument would have. Most wealthy men I had served treated apologies like losses. Adrian accepted blame as though refusing it would cost more. He placed a brown pharmacy bag on the table. Your cardiologist changed your prescriptions. These are for after discharge. I am not accepting another gift. Then consider them part of the medical treatment already provided. That is still charity. No, charity is optional. Keeping you alive was not. I almost smiled, but the movement pulled at my incision. Adrian noticed. Was that nearly a smile? It was pain. You looked happier than before. Do not become confident. The corner of his mouth lifted. It was the first time I had seen him look less like the man whose face appeared on financial magazines and more like someone who might once have laughed without checking who was watching. Before leaving, he handed me an envelope. Inside were my unpaid wages, compensation for the illegal dismissal, and a formal apology from the hotel. Collins has been removed, Adrian said. Because of me? Because security footage showed him forcing a medically unstable employee into the rain and ordering staff to conceal the incident. And Celeste? His expression closed. She has been removed from every foundation position while the board investigates. Removed temporarily. Our families are connected through a proposed merger. Ending the relationship affects more than the two of us. There it is. What? The moment money becomes involved, cruelty becomes complicated. Adrian looked toward the crushed medicine bottle sealed inside an evidence bag. It is complicated, but that does not excuse what she did. She is still your fiancée. It was a family arrangement, not a love match, and it is ending. He left before I could decide whether that information relieved or frightened me. Adrian returned every day during my recovery. He never brought flowers because I had told a nurse that hospital flowers smelled like funerals. Instead, he brought practical things. A phone charger because mine had broken, a cardigan because I was always cold, a notebook because he noticed I wrote questions before the doctors entered, and 6 different containers of soup because he could not decide which one I would tolerate. Billionaires cannot choose soup? I asked. Apparently, we are badly trained in practical matters. You bought mushroom, tomato, chicken, lentil, pumpkin, and something labeled roasted celery. The chef said the celery was elegant. Celery should never be elegant. He sat beside my bed while I tried the tomato soup. Silence with him did not feel empty. It felt dangerous because it gave me time to notice the exhaustion beneath his eyes and the careful distance he maintained so I would never feel trapped. You should be running your company, I said. It has survived without me for several days. Perhaps it has been waiting for the opportunity. My board may agree with you. Then why do you keep coming? He looked down at his hands. My mother collapsed during a dinner when I was 12. There were 30 adults in the room. Everyone waited for my father to react before they helped her. Did she survive? That night? She died 2 years later from another cardiac episode. I am sorry. When I saw people standing around you, I remembered what it felt like to be the only person in a crowded room who understood that someone was dying. His voice lowered. I kept returning because I could not change what happened to my mother. Staying with you was the only thing I knew how to do. That confession opened a small, unwanted space inside me. I had survived by distrusting tenderness, especially when it came from people powerful enough to withdraw it without consequence. Still, each morning I found myself listening for his footsteps. When the social worker discussed my discharge, she asked where I intended to recover. My rented room, I said. Does the building have an elevator? No, which floor? Fourth. She exchanged a concerned look with the nurse. I could walk only short distances and was forbidden from climbing several flights of stairs. Adrian stood near the window, pretending not to listen. The guest house on my property has a ground floor bedroom and a visiting nurse, he said after the social worker left. No, you did not consider it. I considered the part where a recovering hotel maid moves into a billionaire's estate. You would not be a servant. That is easy to say when everyone entering your home is paid to obey you. Then choose another place, and I will cover the cost. No, his patience thinned. Grace, independence does not require you to endanger yourself. Generosity does not give you authority over me. He stopped and deliberately lowered his voice. You are right. Tell me what arrangement you would accept. The question mattered. He did not order, threaten, or persuade. He placed the choice back in my hands. I need to visit the boarding house and collect my belongings. After that, I will stay at a recovery apartment arranged through the hospital, but I will repay the cost when I am able. Agreed. A hospital transport van took us to the boarding house 2 days later. I remained in a wheelchair in the ground floor sitting room, while Adrian and Luis went upstairs to retrieve my belongings. Mrs. Doran, the owner, rushed toward us when she recognized Adrian. Her usual suspicion transformed into a trembling smile. Miss Bennett, we were terribly worried. You moved my things to the basement, didn't you? Your rent was overdue. I was unconscious. I did not know that. Louis called you from the hotel. Her eyes shifted toward Adrian. There may have been a misunderstanding. Adrian reached for his wallet, but I touched his wrist. No. He put it away without argument. I paid the rent I genuinely owed from the hotel settlement and refused the invented penalties until Mrs. Doran removed them. A few minutes later, an elderly woman appeared at the top of the staircase and slowly descended with Louise supporting her. Grace! Margaret Hale crossed the room as quickly as her swollen joints allowed. She was 74, with silver hair and eyes that retained a stubborn brightness. I had met her months earlier sleeping inside a railway station after the privately operated care home where she lived closed without warning. She received a small pension, but most of it disappeared into medication. Mrs. Doran had allowed her to share my room for a small additional payment, and more than once I had delayed filling my own prescription so Margaret could afford hers. She embraced me carefully, then noticed the bandage above my collar. You had the operation. It became an emergency. Her gaze shifted to Adrian. The color left her face. Richard, she whispered. Adrian went rigid. My name is Adrian Vale. Margaret gripped the banister. Richard's son. You knew my father? She stared at him as though 30 years had collapsed into one room. I worked for him before you learned to read. Luis came down carrying my father's photograph and the steel box. Margaret's eyes fixed on the faded emblem stamped into its lid. Where did you get that? My father gave it to me, I said. What was his name? Daniel Bennett. Margaret closed her eyes. A tear slipped over her cheek. He kept the proof. My unease sharpened. Proof of what? Your inheritance. I almost laughed because the word made no sense. My father had died in a charity ward with $38 in his bank account. Margaret pointed toward his framed photograph. Remove the backing. Beneath the cardboard, taped inside the wooden frame, was a tiny brass key. My hands trembled as I placed it inside the lock. The box opened with a dry metallic click. Inside were photographs, folded legal documents, a founder's share certificate, and a sealed letter bearing a faded emblem made from 2 interlocking letters. V and B. Adrian picked up the top photograph. 2 young men stood inside a cluttered workshop beside an early portable cardiac monitor. One was Richard Vale. The other was my father. Daniel looked younger than I had ever known him, his smile broad and hopeful. Across the bottom, someone had written, Vale and Bennett Medical Systems. Equal partners, equal purpose. This cannot be real, Adrian said. Margaret's sadness hardened into anger. It is the most real thing your father spent his life hiding. I unfolded the partnership agreement. Richard Vale and Daniel Bennett each owned 50% of the original company. My father repaired radios in a basement, I said. Before that, he designed the first portable emergency cardiac system Vale sold, Margaret replied. He developed the hospital transport network and several monitoring devices that made the company valuable. I looked at Adrian. Your empire was built on my father's work. His face had lost all certainty. Margaret explained that she had been a junior accountant and administrative secretary during the company's early years. Richard attracted investors and negotiated contracts. Daniel designed the medical systems and insisted they remain safe and affordable. As the company grew, Richard wanted to replace expensive components with cheaper alternatives. Daniel refused. Soon afterward, money disappeared from a corporate account, and documents carrying Daniel's forged signature appeared. Richard threatened to report him for theft unless he surrendered management authority. "Why didn't my father go to the police?" I asked. "Your mother was seriously ill, and you were 6. Richard told Daniel that if he fought, your mother's treatment would end, he would be prosecuted, and you would enter state care. So he surrendered everything. He surrendered his position, not his ownership. Their founder shares were held inside a protected trust. Richard could control company operations, but he could not legally take Daniel's half without an original notarized transfer. Daniel never signed one. Margaret touched the share certificate. Richard buried the trust, altered internal records, and later claimed Daniel had died without a surviving heir. Adrian moved away from us. My father told me Daniel stole from the company. He repeated the lie until it became family history. Why did Daniel never tell Grace? Because Richard continued monitoring him. Daniel believed Grace would be safer if she appeared to know nothing. "Where are the original trust records?" Adrian asked. "I kept certified copies in a bank deposit box after Richard dismissed me. Why wait until now? I was afraid while Richard was alive. After his death, I searched for Grace, but she had moved repeatedly and changed surnames after her mother's second marriage. I found her only months ago, and before I could decide how to tell her, she became ill again. I felt as though the room had tilted. My father had apologized for leaving me nothing, while the hospital that repaired my heart, the hotel that threw me into the rain, and the foundation where Celeste crushed my medicine had all been built partly from his work." I turned toward Adrian. "Did you recognize the emblem in the alley?" I recognized it as an early company mark, but I had never seen the B included. My father removed Daniel's name from every official history before I joined the company. That is why you reacted when I said his name. I remembered seeing it once in an old engineering file, but I did not know who he was. You saved me using money stolen from him." Pain crossed Adrian's face. I did not know what my father had done, but ignorance does not make the harm smaller. His answer left me with nowhere to place my anger. Adrian arranged for 3 independent law firms to examine the evidence, and at my insistence, none of them worked for Vale International. Margaret retrieved the certified trust records. Forensic specialists authenticated the paper, seals, and signatures. My birth history created the final complication. After my mother briefly remarried, my surname had been changed to Reed, and several documents listed my stepfather as my legal guardian. When the marriage ended, I returned to Bennett socially, but the records were never fully corrected. Richard's attorneys had used that confusion to report that Daniel died without an identifiable heir. My original birth certificate, school records, and letters inside the steel box proved otherwise. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, I sat inside a glass conference room at the top of Vale Tower, while attorneys explained that I legally owned 50% of the holding trust controlling Vale International. Half the medical division, half the hotels, half the research centers, warehouses, patents, and investments. On paper, I was worth billions. In my purse, I still carried a bus card with 2 rides remaining. "What happens now?" I asked. One lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Vale may challenge the trust, argue abandonment, or claim that Daniel transferred his interest through an agreement that has since been lost. Litigation could continue for years." Every face turned toward Adrian. His company attorney leaned close to him. "We should adjourn before any position is stated." Adrian looked at the photograph of our fathers lying between us. Was Daniel Bennett's ownership legally transferred? We have found no valid evidence of a transfer. Was the trust deliberately concealed? Yes. Did my father's filings falsely state that Daniel had no heir? The evidence indicates that they did. Adrian sat back, then prepared immediate recognition of Grace Bennett as equal owner. His attorney stared at him. "Adrian, that decision may destabilize the company, activate loan provisions, and destroy the Harrington merger. The company became unstable 30 years ago when it was built on fraud. You have a duty to shareholders. I also have a duty not to continue theft because correcting it is expensive." He signed the instruction before anyone could stop him. I found him later on the rooftop terrace. Wind moved across the city, carrying the distant sound of traffic. His family name was visible on 2 buildings and a hospital tower. "You could lose control of everything," I said. "I never had the right to control your half. You could have fought me. My father did enough fighting against yours. You are still Richard's son." Adrian turned toward me. "That is why I have to choose differently." The anger I had carried since Margaret opened the box weakened, leaving something more dangerous behind. "Why are you making this easy for me? Nothing about discovering that my father destroyed an innocent man is easy. I mean legally, because the truth should not become another test you must survive." The wind lifted a strand of hair across my face. Adrian reached toward it, then stopped before touching me. That restraint affected me more deeply than the gesture would have. "I wanted to hate you," I admitted. "It would probably be safer." "For whom?" "Both of us. I have not felt safe since the night you collapsed. You barely knew me. I knew enough." His gray eyes held mine. "You had been humiliated, fired, and pushed into the rain, yet you were still more concerned about protecting your father's memory than punishing anyone. You spent your medicine money helping Margaret. You would rather negotiate every expense than let me believe saving you gave me authority over your choices. That sounds exhausting. You are exhausting." A laugh escaped me. Adrian smiled, and for one brief moment the distance between us disappeared. Over the following month, we spent nearly every day reviewing the company that was now ours. I understood little about corporate governance, but I understood workers who postponed medical treatment because missing a shift meant missing rent. I understood temporary employees without insurance, cleaners expected to work through pain, and drivers punished for requesting time off. Adrian knew balance sheets, international contracts, and the names of every major investor. I knew the price of a prescription when $27 was all that remained in a person's bag. We argued frequently. I accused him of protecting profit at the expense of people. He accused me of promising reforms faster than the company could fund them without layoffs. Neither of us always won. That was new for him, and being heard was new for me. He moved Margaret into a comfortable assisted living apartment, but allowed her to sign a repayment agreement for $1 per month because she refused to accept charity. He attended my cardiac appointments, remaining outside the examination room unless I invited him in. When the doctors cleared me for longer walks, he took me through the company's original workshop, preserved behind glass in the headquarters basement. My father's name had been removed from every label. Adrian ordered the exhibition closed until the history could be corrected. "Do not erase Richard," I said. "He did something terrible, but pretending he never existed would create another lie." Adrian looked at me with quiet admiration. "What do you suggest?" "Tell the complete story. 2 men built something extraordinary. One betrayed the other. The company should remember both the achievement and the cost." Adrian began asking my opinion before making decisions, not afterward. I began trusting that disagreement would not lead to abandonment. Somewhere between legal meetings, hospital visits, and late dinners eaten over financial reports, the man who had carried me out of the rain became the person I searched for whenever I entered a room. I fought the feeling because love seemed dangerously close to dependency. Adrian never pressured me to name it. Celeste did not disappear quietly. Her family's merger depended on gaining access to Vale International's medical distribution network, and my ownership gave me the power to block it. She requested a private meeting. I refused. She appeared outside my rehabilitation clinic instead, dressed in pale blue and wearing an expression of carefully controlled regret. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You owe me medication and several years of peace. What I did was unforgivable." "Then why are you here?" "Because Adrian is using you." I moved toward the waiting car. Celeste held out a folder. "You should know what he is doing with your trust. I know what you are trying to do." "Do you?" She removed several photographs. One showed Adrian entering a private law office with his chief attorney. Another showed copies of my medical file and my father's certificate spread across a conference table. The final photograph showed Adrian embracing Celeste outside her apartment. The printed date was 3 nights earlier. My stomach tightened. Photographs can be altered. Then ask him. She handed me a document titled Voting Control and Protective Assignment. It stated that after my ownership was recognized, all voting authority would transfer to Adrian for the rest of my life. My signature line remained blank. "Where did you get this?" "From an attorney connected to the trust review." Adrian instructed them to recognize my ownership without conditions. He needs your ownership recognized before he can take control of it. She played an audio recording. Adrian's voice was unmistakable. Grace cannot know until the transfer is secured. If she becomes frightened, she may disappear before we finish. Another man asked, and after she signs? Adrian replied, then I will control the situation. The recording ended. My cardiac monitor vibrated as my pulse climbed. Celeste watched my reaction with concealed satisfaction. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because I know Adrian. He does not make emotional decisions. He rescued you before he knew who you were because he recognized the emblem on your box. He said he did not understand it. Adrian lies most convincingly when he sounds sincere. I held up the photograph of them embracing. When was this taken? 3 nights ago. He came to apologize and said whatever existed between you had complicated his judgment. The picture was genuine, but the date was not. It had been taken 8 months earlier, after Celeste learned that her father might have suffered a stroke. The voting document was based on a proposal drafted by an attorney connected to the Harrington family and rejected by Adrian. The recording contained Adrian's real words, cut from a longer conversation about transferring my shares out of Richard's concealed trust and into an independent structure that no board member, including Adrian, could freeze. I knew none of that. I only knew that I had begun trusting the son of the man who destroyed my father, and now I held what appeared to be proof that history was repeating itself. That evening, Adrian invited me to a private dining room at the top of Vale Tower. The table was set for 2, without photographers, assistants, or legal files. Small yellow flowers stood in the center because I had once mentioned that my mother planted them outside our kitchen window. Adrian waited beside the glass wall overlooking the city. For the first time since I had known him, he looked nervous. You came. I placed Celeste's folder on the table. The warmth left his face. Where did you get this? Does the source change the contents? It may change their meaning. Did you send my medical records to attorneys? For the emergency care claim and to establish your condition on the night of the gala. Did your legal team photograph my father's certificate? They needed authenticated copies. Did you say I could not know about a transfer until it was secured? Adrian stared at me and then understood. Grace, the transfer protects you. Did you say it? Yes, but the recording has been cut. I pushed the voting agreement toward him. Did someone working for you prepare this? He read the first page. Anger sharpened his expression. An attorney proposed something similar. I rejected it immediately. So the board considered taking control of my vote. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because your ownership was not yet legally protected, and I did not want the board's pressure to frighten you into abandoning the claim. You decided what I was allowed to know. I delayed telling you about a rejected proposal until your shares were secure. That was a mistake, but it was not an attempt to control you. I placed the photograph beside the document. Was this also protection? He looked at the image. It was taken 8 months ago. The date says Monday. The date is false. Everything becomes false the moment it threatens you. That is not fair. My father probably heard the same words from yours. Adrian recoiled as if I had struck him. I hated the pain in his face because part of me still wanted to trust him. I am not Richard, he said quietly. How can I know that? Because I surrendered every legal challenge to your ownership. Perhaps you knew you could control me afterward. I would never do that. You already admitted you withheld information. I withheld a rejected board proposal. I did not hide any condition attached to your ownership. Adrian reached inside his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. I asked you here to give you this. Inside were the final recognition documents, filed that afternoon. Every page confirmed my equal ownership. A separate trust instrument placed my shares under my exclusive authority. Adrian had no voting rights, veto, lien, repayment claim, or power to remove me. His signature appeared beneath a clause permanently waiving any challenge. There are no conditions, he said. You may sell, hold, or vote your shares without my approval. You owe me nothing for the surgery. You owe me no relationship. You do not even owe me another conversation. Tears blurred the pages. Why didn't you show me sooner? They were finalized today. What were you planning to ask me tonight? His eyes moved toward the yellow flowers. Whether what exists between us could become more than guilt, history, and legal meetings. The honesty made leaving almost unbearable. I need time, then take it. You will not send people after me? No. You will not freeze the accounts? I cannot, and I would not. You will not use the company to force me back? His face tightened. I would rather lose you than prove your worst fear correct. I left the tower carrying the documents against my chest. By morning, Margaret and I had moved into an apartment arranged by an independent attorney. I changed my number and sent Adrian one handwritten note. I would rather return to poverty than spend my life wondering whether my repaired heart is another asset you intend to manage. For 3 weeks, he did not contact me. The silence hurt more than pursuit would have. Each morning, I checked my phone before remembering that I had changed the number. Each night, I told myself his absence proved he had never cared, even though another part of me knew he was doing exactly what I had demanded. During that time, the Harrington family moved aggressively. They called an emergency shareholder meeting at the same hotel where the gala had taken place. News reports claimed Adrian's judgment had become unstable. My ownership remained under internal review, and the Harrington merger was necessary to protect the company. Celeste appeared on television describing me as a vulnerable former employee surrounded by opportunistic lawyers. She implied that Adrian had paid for my operation because we were romantically involved and that I had used his guilt to take his father's company. Margaret wanted me to remain home. They expect you to appear emotional, she warned. Then they will not be disappointed. Grace, my father remained silent to protect me. Silence did not save him. I wore a simple dark blue dress, carried Daniel's photograph in my handbag, and entered the hotel through the main doors. The ballroom looked exactly as it had on the night I nearly died. Chandeliers glittered above the marble. Musicians played near the stage. Wealthy guests spoke in lowered voices as I passed. That is the maid. She manipulated Adrian. I heard she lived in a boarding house. Money does not create class. Every whisper reopened the humiliation, but I kept walking. Celeste stood near the stage in a silver gown with 2 security guards behind her. This is a closed corporate meeting, she said. I own half the corporation. Your governance rights have not been certified by the board. Adrian filed the recognition documents. Adrian is emotionally compromised. She raised her voice so nearby reporters could hear. You should be grateful that he paid for your operation instead of trying to seize his family's legacy. The guards moved toward me. My chest tightened, but before either could touch me, Adrian's voice crossed the ballroom. Step away from her. He stood on the stage beneath the enormous Vale International emblem. He looked thinner than he had 3 weeks earlier, and exhaustion shadowed his eyes, but his voice carried without effort. The guards stopped. Adrian descended the steps and walked toward us. He did not touch me or attempt to claim a place at my side. He faced Celeste. You will never again order an employee, guest or owner, removed from a Vale property. Celeste smiled tightly. She is not an employee. No, she is your employer. Shock swept through the room. Celeste's father pushed past several board members. Adrian, this is neither the place nor the time. Public lies require a public correction. Adrian returned to the stage. The lights dimmed, and the giant screen displayed the photograph of Richard Vale and Daniel Bennett inside their original workshop. For more than 30 years, Adrian began, Vale International has told the world that it was created by one visionary founder. That history is false. My father built this company with an engineer named Daniel Bennett. Daniel designed the technology that gave Vale its first success. He owned half of the company and intended its products to save lives, regardless of a patient's income. The room became silent. When Daniel resisted unsafe cost-cutting, my father framed him for theft, removed him from management, and concealed his founder trust. Daniel died in poverty, while this corporation earned billions from his work. His daughter, Grace Bennett, survived by working inside a hotel that legally belonged as much to her family as it did to mine. My vision blurred. Adrian displayed the authenticated trust documents, my birth records, and his signed waiver. Grace Bennett controls 50% of Vale International's holding company. Her ownership is not a gift, settlement, or reward. It is property stolen from her father and legally restored to his heir. Reporters surged toward the stage. Board members shouted questions. Adrian raised one hand. The screen changed to the security footage from the gala. It showed Celeste striking me, crushing the medicine bottle, and watching as Mr. Collins dragged me away. Another camera showed me collapsing outside in the rain. On the night of the foundation gala, Adrian said, Grace was assaulted in this ballroom, denied her wages, and removed through a loading entrance while suffering a medical emergency. I was standing on a stage speaking about compassion while the company bearing my name failed to show it. Celeste's face lost all color. "You are doing this because you are sleeping with her!" she shouted. Adrian did not look away from the audience. Grace has never exchanged affection for medical care, ownership, or influence. She owes me no gratitude for saving her life, and she owes this company nothing for returning property that was already hers. The screen changed again. The photograph of Adrian embracing Celeste appeared beside the original file data, proving it had been taken 8 months earlier. The voting agreement appeared beside digital records identifying the Harrington-connected attorney who had altered the rejected proposal. The audio recording played in full. Adrian's words continued beyond the edited section. Once the transfer into Grace's independent trust is secured, she will control the situation. No board member, including me, will have authority over her shares. A forensic report showed where Celeste's version had been cut. Her father turned toward her in disbelief. Adrian addressed the room. Evidence of document manipulation, illegal access to confidential records, and attempted financial interference has been referred to federal investigators. The Harrington merger is canceled. Celeste Harrington and every representative connected to these actions are removed from all company and foundation positions. Celeste stared at me with hatred. "You were nothing before Adrian found you." A year earlier, those words would have broken me. I looked around the ballroom where people had watched me crawl after my medicine. "I was Daniel Bennett's daughter before Adrian found me," I said. "I was simply the only person in this room who did not know what my father had left behind." Security escorted Celeste and her father from the ballroom. No one laughed. Adrian stepped down from the stage and stopped several feet away. The crowd waited for him to embrace me, expecting the billionaire to claim the woman he had rescued. Instead, he handed me an envelope. "What is this?" I asked. "My resignation as chief executive." "Why?" "Because the board should decide whether I remain, and you should be free to vote without wondering whether I used our relationship to protect my position." "You are giving up the company?" "I am accepting that half of it was never mine to command." I opened the envelope. His signature appeared at the bottom of the page. "You could lose everything." "No." His eyes met mine. "I would still have my half of the company, responsibility for my mistakes and feelings for you that I cannot force you to return." The noise of the ballroom receded. "Why didn't you come after me?" "You ask for time." "I thought your silence meant you did not care." "I cared enough to believe you had the right to leave." My control broke. Tears slid down my face. Adrian did not move closer until I reached for his hand. His fingers closed around mine carefully, as though he still feared I might disappear. I folded the resignation and handed it back. "I will not accept this until an independent governance review is completed." A murmur moved through the board members. "This company has already suffered from one man believing he should control it alone," I said. "My first vote as equal owner is to establish shared governance, independent oversight, and equal authority between the two founder trusts." Adrian stared at the envelope. "Is that your first decision?" "Yes." "What is your second?" I looked toward the housekeepers, servers, drivers, and kitchen staff standing at the back of the ballroom. "Every employee, including temporary staff, will receive emergency medical coverage and paid sick leave." Several workers began crying. "My third decision is the creation of the Daniel Bennett Cardiac Fund. No employee or immediate family member will be denied urgent heart treatment because they cannot afford it." Applause began among the staff and spread through the room. Adrian's eyes filled with emotion. "You are going to change this company. We are going to return it to what our fathers once claimed they wanted to build." "And what was that?" "Something that saves people before asking what they are worth." The following year was not a fairy tale. Owning half an empire did not magically teach me how to run it. I studied finance, medicine, manufacturing, and corporate law until numbers followed me into my dreams. I toured factories where workers were afraid to speak honestly in front of executives. I visited hospitals using equipment my father had designed, and warehouses where temporary staff had no health benefits. Adrian never treated my inexperience as stupidity. When I made a mistake, he corrected me privately. When board members dismissed my proposals, he asked them to explain why decades of experience had not helped them notice the suffering in their own workforce. We still argued. I wanted every reform immediately. Adrian showed me which changes could be funded without closing plants or eliminating jobs. He wanted caution. I reminded him that caution often sounded reasonable to people who were not in pain. Slowly, we learned to meet in the middle without abandoning the people at either end. Trust returned through ordinary moments. He shared information before I requested it. I stopped interpreting every disagreement as an attempt to control me. He placed coffee on my desk each morning, always without sugar. I found reasons to remain near his office after meetings ended. On difficult nights, he walked with me through the headquarters library, and I told him stories about my father repairing radios for neighbors who could not pay. Adrian eventually listened to the final voicemail from his mother while I sat beside him. He wept without hiding his face, and I did not tell him to be strong. 6 months after the shareholder meeting, we opened the Daniel Bennett Heart Center 4 blocks from my old boarding house. The center treated patients regardless of insurance status and included funding for transportation, medication, and recovery housing. The first surgical patient was a hotel cleaner named Rosa, a widowed mother with the same valve disorder I had. I sat beside her before the operation. She clutched my hand. "I'm afraid my children will be alone if something happens." "You will not be alone," I said. "Neither will they." "How can you promise that?" I thought of the alley, the rain, and the crowded ballroom where no one had moved. Because someone once stayed when everyone else walked away, and I learned that staying can become a promise. After Rosa was taken into surgery, I found Adrian waiting in the corridor with my old canvas bag. "Margaret said this belongs to you," he said. I thought she had thrown it away. She said poor families should decide for themselves what is worth keeping. Inside lay my father's restored steel box. The faded Vale and Bennett emblem had been polished but not replaced. Beside it rested a small velvet ring case. My breath caught. Adrian did not open it immediately. "The first night I saw this bag, I believed you held it because it contained everything you owned." "It did. I was wrong. You were carrying your father's truth, your family's stolen future, and enough courage to survive a room filled with people who had forgotten how to care." He opened the case. A simple sapphire ring rested inside, surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I do not want to rescue you again," he said. "I do not want you to need me, owe me, or stay beside me because I paid a hospital bill. I want to be the man you choose without losing any part of yourself." Tears rose before I could stop them. "What exactly are you asking?" "I am asking whether you will continue frightening board members, correcting my worst instincts, and making the world uncomfortable beside me for the rest of our lives." I laughed through my tears. "That is not a traditional proposal. You have never made anything traditional." Adrian lowered himself to one knee. Through the glass wall behind him, Margaret and several nurses appeared, pretending badly that they were not watching. "Grace Bennett, I love you because you never needed my name to have value. You taught me that saving someone's life does not give you a claim on it, that returning stolen property is not generosity, and that love can exist only where both people are free to leave. Will you marry me?" I touched the scar above my heart. Doctors had repaired it. Adrian had protected it when I could not. My father's legacy had given me power, yet my heart belonged entirely to me, which meant I could finally offer it without fear. "Yes." Adrian closed his eyes for one trembling second before placing the ring on my finger. When he stood, I held his face and kissed him while the nurses cheered behind the glass, and Margaret cried loudly enough for the entire corridor to hear. Months later, we returned to the hotel ballroom for the annual Vale Bennett Foundation Gala. The chandeliers and marble remained, but the service entrance was no longer used to hide employees. Every worker entered through the main lobby. Mr. Collins had been replaced by a former housekeeper who understood how invisibility could become cruelty. Full health care, paid sick leave, and emergency assistance were now standard across the company. Near the stage stood a photograph of Richard Vale and Daniel Bennett inside their workshop. The plaque beneath it told the complete truth. 2 men had created a medical company together. One had betrayed the other, and the future depended on remembering both the invention and the injustice. Before my speech, a young server dropped a tray near the place where Celeste had crushed my medicine. Glass shattered across the floor. The girl froze, her face turning white as the room fell silent. I knelt and began gathering the unbroken pieces. Adrian joined me. Then the hotel director crouched beside us, followed by 2 guests and a security guard. The server stared. "I am so sorry. It was an accident," I said. "Am I fired?" "No one should lose a future because of one broken tray." Her eyes moved toward my ring, then toward the large photograph of me near the stage. "You are Grace Bennett." "Yes." "The owner?" "Half owner." She looked at Adrian. "And he owns the other half." Adrian handed me an unbroken glass. "Only when she is feeling generous." The girl laughed through her tears. I sent her to rest, then stood beside Adrian. "A year ago," I said quietly. "I thought this floor was where my life ended. It nearly was. No, I think it was where I finally stopped being invisible." Adrian offered his hand, and together we walked toward the stage beneath the new silver name, Vale Bennett International. The audience rose, but before beginning my prepared speech, I looked beyond the donors toward the workers standing at the back. "The first time I entered this ballroom," I said, "I was told that people serving wealthy guests should remain unseen. I believed poverty made me unimportant. I believed illness made me a burden. I believed being abandoned meant I was not worth finding." Adrian's hand closed around mine. I was wrong. No woman becomes valuable because a billionaire notices her. No maid becomes worthy because a powerful man carries her out of the rain. I was already Daniel Bennett's daughter. I was already a woman fighting to survive. I was already worth saving. Tears moved through the room. Money did not give me value. It gave me enough power to make people stop pretending they could not see me. The man beside me saved my life, but the greater thing he did came afterward. He faced the truth about his family, returned what was never his, and allowed me to choose him freely. Adrian lowered his eyes, struggling with emotion. I once believed I owed him my heart because he paid to repair it. Now I understand that love is not a debt. Love is what remains when neither person is trapped, purchased, or forced to stay. The applause began softly and grew until the ballroom shook with it. I looked down at the marble where my medicine bottle had once broken. I could still remember that small, terrible crack. I could still remember hundreds of people watching while I crawled between their shoes. But that was no longer the loudest sound in the room. The loudest sound was an entire crowd standing for the woman they had once abandoned, while beside her stood the billionaire who had saved a dying maid and discovered that she had never belonged beneath him. She had owned half his empire all along, and in the end, she became the one who taught it how to have a heart.